Hi, this is Rabbi Orlofsky, and welcome back to the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. And whether you're watching with our friends at Torah Anytime, who are also our producers now, or wherever you watch or listen to your podcasts, as always, we're happy to have you along. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment. And as always, keep your comments civil. And try, if you can, unless you, mamish, have some kind of personality disorder, try not to make nasty comments. It's really not that hard. It's not hard. I know people who never make any nasty comments, and if they do, they don't take the time to actually write it down. So if you're mamish, feel like you have to make these comments, as I mentioned last time, I will delete them. And my advice is get professional help, because there's clearly something wrong with you. I don't know why. Why would anybody do this? And to all of the major majority of our listening audience, thank you so much. Your comments mean a lot, and I'm going to address some of them, today, because it's the end of Bin Azmanim. Next week already, it's going to be Elul. We're going to be into Elul mode and things, So let's do a little housekeeping, take care of some things that need to be done. First and foremost, we have a sponsor this week, Anonymous, sponsored to keep the Rabbi Orlofsky Show going. So thank you so much. And as always, we need more sponsorships to be able to keep the Rabbi Orlofsky Show going. So please, if you've been thinking of it, every now and then someone says to me, I've been thinking of doing it, and I think this is the time. Well, thank you so much. It's the support that keeps us going. People have said to me, maybe you should set up a paywall or have part of the program, behind the paywall, so that you get to the point, like some of these podcasts, you say, if you want to hear the rest of the show, then you have to subscribe, whatever, and stuff like that. And I said, that's not why I do this. I do this to try to give chizuk and to give Klal Yisrael, a good feeling. Because one of the comments, which was made last week, was, why is he talking about literature? Why isn't he talking about Torah? Yeah. So luckily somebody commented back to him, in season 1, the podcast, it's a show, not a shir. This is not a shir. I give shiurim. Yeah, you can go into any time and look Rabbi Orlofsky shiurim, not the podcast, shiurim, and that's it. They're straightforward. Well, mostly anyway, Torah. Yeah, but the podcast, I talk about whatever I want, whatever moves me, and that I think will give meaning to people. That they'll get some inspiration and things like that, and some enjoyment from it. So if you're looking for just straight Torah, then by all means go to Torah Anytime. I have quite a few Torah shiurim up there, and by all means, that's the address for you. This is not that address. Yeah. Okay. So I had a few comments. One was a comment I got a number of times, actually, and that is when I did my podcast on AI, they said, but you never said what AI said. What did they come up with? So here is what AI suggested. I will read it to you. The question was, what would be a good topic for Rabbi Dovid Orlofsky to speak about on his next podcast? ChatGPT said, here are several strong topic ideas that would fit Rabbi Dovid Orlofsky's signature style, combining Torah insight, practical life guidance, and humor, depending on his goals for the episode. Category 1, Torah and personal growth. How to be frum and normal. A classic Orlofsky-style blend of humor and insight on balancing religious seriousness with being emotionally healthy and socially normal. The art of tshuva all year long, making tshuva a daily habit and not just a Rosh Hashanah panic project. How to talk to Hashem when you don't know what to say. On real personal tefillah, not just checking off the siddur. For younger listeners or singles, why you're not married yet and why that might be okay, with the classic Rabbi Orlofsky spin, emunah, effort, and self-worth. So Surviving Shidduch season with your sanity intact, a practical and spiritual roadmap to managing pressure and keeping perspective. Parenting and chinuch, raising kids with emunah, not just rules. Focusing on transmitting values in a way that sticks. What Yeshiva didn't teach about building a bias Neman B'Yisrael. Real-life relationship and communication skills from a Torah outlook. Light but deep. Does Hashem want me to be happy? Torah sources on Simcha and whether it's a real avoda. Judging favorably, a lost mitzvah. Exploring the mitzvah of Dan L'Kaf Zchus in today's quick-to-condemn world. If you're not growing, you're coasting, and that's dangerous. Avoiding spiritual stagnation in an overstimulated generation. Would you like a more specific theme based on the season, Elul, Tisha B'Av, summer break, or the particular audience? So that is what AI suggested for me. So I hope some of those will be meaningful to you, and it could be that some people will say, like, yeah, what about that? So if any of those topics really move you, I'm always happy to talk about anything. But my last podcast actually got a tremendous amount of response. Most of it positive, some of it, one comment that was negative. But people were very interested in my literature suggestions, and people made other suggestions of works that they thought I should have left out, I should have included. Things that I should have included that I didn't mention. Somebody pointed out that, Dickens is, so long because he got paid by the word. That's okay. That in itself doesn't make it bad. When we deal with Chazal, when we deal with Torah, when we deal with Rishonim, and my Masorah from Chavetz Chaim is in Achronim, you can be medayek in every word because they don't just talk. Just the opposite. They were not paid by the word. In fact, the Ktsais, HaChoshen, and his parish, there's a lot of abbreviations because he was so poor he couldn't afford the ink, and he wrote as sparingly as he possibly could. And so when we look at their words, we can be ma'ayin into it. I'll never forget one of my first years when I was teaching Mesilas Yesharim, and I was making a diak at one point. I had made it a number of times, I guess, because it inspired the person to say, "You're learning this like it's a Rashi." And I said, "Shkoyach, that's exactly what I'm doing." And the Vilna Gaon, who was a pretty smart guy, he said there was not one extra word in the first 11 parakim in Mesilas Yesharim. I've heard two different versions. After that, he found an extra word, or after that, he didn't feel he was ma'ayin enough into it. I don't know. But that's for sure. There's not an extra word. So if you look at the Mesilas Yesharim and it looks like he's being wordy, he's not. Every word is important, and you have to be medayek in it. I think I've told this story already. It could be I've told this story, and you'll indulge me. But my son, who learned by Rabbi Potash, whose grandfather was Rabbi Chaim Zimmerman, tells a story that he heard from his Rebbe Baruch Ber, who was in Volozhin when Rabbi Chaim Briska gave his first shir in Volozhin. Because I may have told this story. He says he started off by reading a Ksais, and he asked a question. And he went around the room, and he said, sitting around the room were all the Rosh Yeshiva that we still learn today, their Svarim, and everybody gave a teretz. And then Reb Chaim went around the room and shlugged up everybody's teretz. Yeah, and then he showed him how the Ksais, in a few words, was addressing all of their points that they were making. Well, he had their attention. Then he gave his teretz. Everybody was very impressed. And then he shrugged it up, and he showed how the Ksais had his answer also. And then he brought another answer. He says, people, it was like a simcha. And then he shrugged it up, and everybody was depressed. And then he brought it an even better teretz, and the way he tells over the story is, they were dancing on the tables. And then he shrugged it up, and it was like Tisha B'Av, and he showed how in 2 words the Ksais had been mechaven to his answer as well. This went on for 3 hours. And a little Ksais. So every word, mamash, has to be treated very carefully. This is not true by literature. And I will tell you, it's also not true by Musar. Because in Musar, there is a concept called the koyach hatzir, where you use your ability to build up the question and to create an insight into what it is you're trying to bring across. Lekat Sichos Musar, which is probably my favorite sefer on Musar Shmuzin by Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Sher. He writes in a way that is like poetry. He builds up the story and he builds it up, and it's so beautiful. So therefore, Bali Musar, you're not medayik in every word. They're not trying to just give across. They're trying sometimes to help you develop it. I used to see the difference. I had the schus to go to Reb Moshe Shapiro to 2 of his shiurim. I went to the Thursday night shiur, which was open to the public, and the Tuesday afternoon shiur, which when I joined was in Pirkei Avos, and then it went to Mishlei with the Grup. There was a big difference. On Thursday night, he spent a lot more time being masbir the point that he was making and developing it to make sure that everybody understood it. On Tuesday, he spoke in more shorthand, because he knew these were people who already had learned by him for years, and they understood when he said something what it meant. And so he didn't have to spend as much time building it up as he did for somebody who was a neophyte and hearing it for the first time. One of my prime shiurim is Why Be Jewish. This is a shiur that I usually give as an introductory shiur. When somebody says to me, want to give a shiur to a new group, I usually go to Why Be Jewish. Why Be Jewish is based on the first 2 lines of the first parak of Mesilas Yesharim. Right? Why we're in this world, to get pleasure from Hashem. But the shiur takes a long time. Why? Because I first have to eliminate all of the other arguments that people give of why we should be a Jew, why we're in this world, why we're alive. And I have to slug up all those other answers. Lahavdil, compare myself to Reb Chaim, but like Reb Chaim did first before he started to try to get to the pshat and the ksais, to eliminate all of the other different possibilities. So that takes time. And as you build it up, right? I probably told this already also. I'm sorry. I start to repeat myself. I probably told this already, but you start to repeat yourself. They did me in the Purim play one year, where they had me like talking, giving a share, and then I stopped and went like this. And everybody laughed. I didn't know what, and they did it a few times. I said to somebody, "What is that?" They go, "Rebbe, you do that all the time." And I said, "No, I don't." He goes, "Yeah, you do." So the next time I was in shir, and I was in the middle of being masber, whatever it is, and they said, "Look, you just did it." I said, "Oh, now I understand." Because there's a method to my approach. My approach is that I use humor as the koyach hatzira in Musar to be able to bring a point across. So I'll do a little routine to build up something and to set it up in order to then go and make the point I want to make. But if you can use this to pull people in, make it a story, so then people become more engaged. As we mentioned last time, that's the reason that Shlomo Melech wrote a sefer called Mishlei, because with a mashal you can pull people in to see. It's a mamshich delev. It pulls people in. Sometimes that's how you do it. I'll give you an example. This Be'er Shabbos in my little shul. I have a little shul in my chotzer. If you ever happen to be in Har Nof for Shabbos and you're looking for a nice davening, it's probably the nicest davening in Har Nof, and I'm biased. I'm not going to pretend I'm not, but I just repeat what I hear. You understand? But so we always have a kiddush, and I speak at the kiddush. So I wanted to talk about the pasuk, Lo al halechem levada yichya adam. Translated as, man does not live by bread alone. So I could have just started at that point, but I made a little story. I said, there was a fellow by the name of Pernell Roberts. You have to be a little bit of a historian, in modern culture to know who he was. There was a very popular TV show called Bonanza. It was a Western. And it was about the Cartwrights. And he had 3 sons, Adam, Haas, and little Joe. And Adam was played by Pernell Roberts. And the show was on for many years. And he decided he wanted to do other things, and he left the show. This was never done in Hollywood, and he was blacklisted for many years. But I don't know exactly when they lifted the ban, but at some point he got to do a commercial for a wine. And he's holding the glass of wine, and he says, whatever wine, because man does not live by bread alone. You understand? You don't live by bread alone. You also need meat, you also need wine, etc. But that's mamish pum fakir from what the pasuk is telling us. Man does not live by bread alone. Elamei pi Hashem. It's not the bread. So they say, well, you don't live by bread. You also need meat. You also need wine. It's the exact opposite of what the pasuk was trying to bring across. But I hope that I pulled people into what I wanted to say with the story. So people hear about an actor and a Western and a commercial. And, so you set things up in a certain way that there's a story. And as the story evolves, people get pulled into it. The Medrash Tanchuma says that's how Korach managed to turn everybody against Moshe Rabbeinu. He told a story. There was this almana, and she was trying to feed her family, and this and that. And then Moshe's brother Aaron comes, and he takes truma, and Moshe says, and the rest of my family gets mice and that, And then she gets an animal, and he's a sheep, and he says, I get the first of the wool. He says, I'll shecht it. And they said, okay, we get parts of the behemoth, until the whole family starved to death. And the Medrash adds, even though this was total nonsense, because they were living in the midbar and they were eating man. Nobody was working the land, and nobody was starving. The whole thing was ridiculous. But you set up a whole story, and it works. People get sucked into the story. So that's why, yes, very often literature will spend time on things that are not important to the story per se. Right? So, for example, it'll spend a page describing the scene for you, even though you don't need that to understand the story. You could just, the Kitzur Dvarim tell over the story that he went here, and then he went there, and they did this, etc. I don't have to describe what the morning looked like. There's a novel that I read. It is not on my recommended reading list, although it is considered fine literature. And it's called The Great Gatsby. And I read it, and I know people have been raving about this book. I didn't understand. I don't know what was so great about this. And I asked this to this girl I met who was in college, going for her master's in literature. She says, well, I asked the professor. And he said, if you don't know, then I can't explain it to you. This is just abuse. This is why nobody should go to college, if you ask me. That's your answer? You're a professor of English literature and you can't explain why this is a good book? Just, Ani ma'amin be'emunah shalema, that Great Gatsby is a tremendous novel? Why? Tell me why. So I'm a big believer in this. Anyway, so I looked it up in a few different places, and what was interesting is they said it was written very concisely, and so he rewrote it many times to get it down as brief as he could. And there was one paragraph where he wrote it so it would sound like the waves of the sea. I didn't spot this particular paragraph. I'm afraid it was wasted on me, a Philistine like myself. But the idea behind it was that he mamish went to make it as concise as possible and to bring across all the ideas without having pages of description like other novels would. I remember seeing a New Yorker cartoon where Tennyson handed in to the editor the charge of the Light Brigade. And it begins, half a league, half a league, half a league onwards. Mr. Tennyson, can't you come to a point? Okay, that's poetry, you understand? But the fact that they're lengthy in and of themselves is not a problem, because sometimes people just enjoy reading the literature as poetry. Right? That's the idea. So that was one comment. But here's another comment. This was written by an old friend. I don't know if she wants her name mentioned. She didn't say, but. In response to your literature podcast, as someone who is overly educated, I would like to suggest the book, Are You My Mother by P.D. Eastman. It is the ultimate Moshe of the history and fate of the Jewish people. The little bird leaves the home it belongs to look for her source, mother. She runs to accept everything she meets, even while not seeing her when she passes by. Finally, it runs into the most frightening snort that brings the bird to finally acknowledge its need for its mother. At that point, that which is most fearful places the baby bird back in its nest. Brilliant story and a much quicker read than Dickens. Almost anything is a quicker read than Dickens. So, Are You My Mother was not on my list. And I told her the reason it was not on my list is because I didn't do books that are specifically children's books, that are written for children. Because if I was going to do children's books, then there are a few other classics that I would include. The Giving Tree is one. Yeah, The Giving Tree is something that every parent should want their children to read, where the tree wants to just give to the little boy, and the boy just takes and takes and takes and takes, and doesn't give anything back. Takes its fruit, takes its branches. In the end, he says, I want to travel, I need a boat. So he cuts down, the tree itself until she's nothing but an old stump. And then he comes back and he's an old man, and the tree says, I don't have any branches for you to climb on because I'm too old to climb. Because I don't have any fruit. He says, I can't really eat fruit at my age. I don't have this and that, because I'm just an old stump. And he says, well, that's all I really need at this point, because I'm just going to come and sit down. And the tree was happy. So it's nice to know, to bring across the idea to children that they tend to take advantage of their parents. I just don't like the Musahaskel at the end. Because after this tree has been abused by this little boy until it's nothing left but an old stump, it's glad that it can at least give the old stump. I don't think it did a very good job of chinuch with this child at all. But okay. But the idea, at least, of do you want to be someone who just takes and takes and takes, I think is an important idea. Both Horace books are very important. Yeah? Horace hatches an egg, which is, of course, Dr. Seuss, where this bird doesn't want to bother sitting on its egg anymore, and convinces Horace to do it. And Horace sits there, very uncomfortably sitting on this egg, which is not natural for an elephant, until finally the egg's ready to hatch, and the bird comes over and says, go away, it's my baby, get out of here. And it comes out, it's a little elephant bird. The idea being that there's reward for your effort. And the person who just walks away and does nothing, right? Somebody sent me once a takeoff on the famous parable of the ant and the grasshopper. The ant would work dutifully collecting food down into its nest, and the grasshopper would just play. And the ant said, listen, it's going to be winter, there's not going to be any food around. And he says, I don't worry about tomorrow, I just worry about today. And sure enough, when the winter came, grasshopper didn't have any food and he died. That's the original story. The modern story is, and then the grasshopper went to the government and said that the ant is abusing me, and they took away the ant's food and gave it to the grasshopper. That's a more modern take on it. Where we penalize people who work hard and save their money and give it to people who don't work hard and don't save their money. So that's another children's book. And then, this one I use in Shiurim all the time, Horace hears a who. Horace, the elephant, has very good hearing. And he hears on this dandelion, there's an entire city inside the dandelion, but it's so small that only he can hear it with his gigantic ears. And the other animals decide that he's crazy, and they're going to disabuse him of this, and they take the dandelion and they're going to throw it into the fire. And the little town is called Whoville. And he tells all the little who's they have to make noise so other people can hear them. They're all making noise, but there's this one little who's not. And they say, why aren't you making noise? He goes, I'm just a little who, I'm not going to make a difference. And of course, he adds his voice, and then they hear him, and he saves Whoville. And I use this in Shurim all the time, that, every one of us is that little who has that ability that if we add our voice, we can bring Mashiach. We can change the matzav. It's just, everybody thinks I'm not that important, so who cares about my voice? And yet I'm the one who could determine what's going to happen, in the end. So I think it's a very important children's book. Okay, that's a quick overview. But I also got an email saying you didn't mention any nonfiction. So it's extensive. It's extensive to talk about nonfiction, because that includes books on history and books on science and books on society and books on psychology. There's so many different things that are covered by that. But I will go to a few of my go-tos that I enjoy very much. The first one is a very large book. It's intimidatingly large. Most people are put off just by the size of it. It's called The Power Broker by Robert Caro. My friend Joe Werfel, Shalom, told me, you have to read this book. And it's the life of Robert Moses. Most of you have never heard of him. If you live on Long Island, you might be familiar with the Robert Moses Causeway. Otherwise, there's not much. Robert Moses built the Whitestone Bridge, the Throgs Neck Bridge, the Triborough Bridge, the Verrazano Bridge. He built all the major parks. He built Jones Beach. He built all the major roads, the Belt Parkway, the Cross Island Parkway, the Clearview Expressway, the Long Island Expressway, Grand Central Parkway, Northern State Parkway, Southern State Parkway. Just an enormous amount of what he accomplished. And the way he did this was by figuring out how to gain power and use that power. And he held power in New York City and state for 40 years. He stood up to FDR at the head of his power, and FDR had to give in. He told LaGuardia what to do when he was mayor. He did everything. He had unbelievable power. He at one point had 13 city and state jobs. The power that he wielded was unbelievable. And the book was written by someone with the name of Robert Caro, C-A-R-O. And it was so one of the big problems with history, one of the most boring books I have ever read. And my determination to my continuing secular education that I didn't get in university is that I will read a book if I think it's worthwhile, even though it is written so poorly and so painfully that it brings you to tears. Was called An Economic History of the United States. I don't recommend this to anybody. Another extremely boring book is a 2-part book called England Under the Reign of Charles II. Yeah. This was the period of the Restoration. Charles I was killed, and his son was whisked away to the continent, and this was, they tried to make a democracy and not a monarchy, and eventually there was a restoration, and they brought back his son, Charles II. And it was all England during that time. Extremely boring. It was by a historian called Agg. Not easy reading and not really engaging. But it came in handy because I have a fellow who was in NCSY, went on to become a professor of history. And I met him in England, where he was doing research on his doctoral thesis on Charles II. And I said, I thought that Agg wrote the definitive biography. And he was like, how did you hear of Agg? And I said, I read his two, he goes, nobody knows about that book. I said, yeah, well, I read it, So he says, well, there are 3 American universities that have departments specializing just in the history of Charles II. In fact, he said, I was recently at a Charles II convention. I said, what do you mean everyone dresses up like Charles II and big turkey legs? He says, no, everyone presents different papers and suggestions and, adds to the history of that period. So it was amazing. He was working on his doctoral thesis, Petitions During the Reign of Charles II. So, okay, I don't recommend those books. They're difficult to get through. But The Power Broker is a page turner. It's very exciting. And in fact, there's an award that they give out for history as literature. And it won the award because it was just so well written. It's really an exciting story. So he then turned his attention to Lyndon Johnson, because Lyndon Johnson was also a person who learned how to use power. That's why he was drawn to him. He has finished 4 of what is meant to be a 5-volume biography of Lyndon Johnson. The 5th volume he's still working on. He's well into his 80s. So, we'll see if he gets it out beforehand, on the books that I do not recommend, there's a fantasy series called Game of Thrones, which was fabulously popular. It is extremely inappropriate, which is why I don't read it or recommend it. But it turned into 7 novels. It was supposed to be 5, it turned into 7. And he's only put out 5. The last one came out like 25 years ago. And he gets interviewed a lot about different questions. And so he says, what question do you dislike the most? And he says, who's going to finish the series after I die? Because I'm obviously not in a rush to put out the last 2 books. I hate that question. But Robert Caro, we'll see if he gets out the last volume. The first 2, I didn't find them so engaging. The 3rd and the 4th, which is called The Master of the Senate and Passage of Power, I highly recommend. It is so interesting and so well written. The Senate was designed to not accomplish anything. That is, he starts with a quote in the 3rd book, where Jefferson asks Washington, why do you have this Senate? What is the point of it? He says, why do you pour your tea into your saucer before you drink it? He says, to cool it off. He says, that's the purpose of the Senate. It's not a parliament where everybody just gets in and votes and does whatever they want. It goes from the House of Representatives, which represents population, and then it goes into the Senate, where things work slower and there's more argumentation and more debate. And there was a filibuster and there was things to do to slow down the process. It was specifically created to slow down the process. And he writes how Lyndon Johnson figured out how to beat the system and how to get things done in the Senate. A really fascinating read. And the last one is when he was vice president of Kennedy's, and when Kennedy got assassinated, what he had to accomplish in 6 months. And he said, nobody no president in American history, and this was before the Trump era, accomplished what he did in 6 months. And he outlines all the things that were against him, etc. But it reads absolutely fascinating. It's just a fascinating read. I reread this book a few times so that I can give my evaluation of it honestly. And it's called The Black Swan, which I found absolutely fascinating. You can hear people say it's a black swan event, and he maintains that all of the rules of statistics and calculations and all these things are thrown out the window by a black swan event, meaning that something happens that you expect a swan to be white. Sometimes there's a black swan, and it's totally unexpected. So every now and then there's a black swan event that destroys everything that's been going on before that. And he happens to be Lebanese, and he describes the Lebanese Civil War as being one of those events. He says the Christians and Muslims lived together in Lebanon for 1,000 years. And then all of a sudden, the Civil War broke out, and the whole country got destroyed. And that was a black swan. There was no way to predict that. World War I was a black swan event. And that's why, as long as I'm mentioning history, the books of Barbara Tuchman is a historian that also very readable. The Zimmerman Telegram about how America got into World War I. The Guns of August, where she shows how basically in the first month of World War I, everything happened and nothing really happened after that point. Brilliantly written. But one of her books was The Proud Tower, where she sets up what Europe looked like before World War I and how World War I came and destroyed everything. It was a changing event, ad kedei kach, that I remember going to Shovavim Shiurim, and they asked the question, how come women today don't have a Vesas Kavua, when even in the 1800s, the majority of women had what was called the Vesas Kavua. So one of the Teirutzim that the Rav brought down, actually I was going to Rav Geltel of the Boston Medallion, and I don't remember who he quoted, but he said because when a woman is in a siege, then her system doesn't work normally, and it'll throw off whatever her regular cycle is. And since World War I, we have been in a state of siege. Everything's been destroyed after World War I. All institutions, everything, the way things normally work. Ad kedei kach that it's a laugh line now when someone brings a mashal and says there was a king, and everybody laughs because who knows from a king? The last monarchies were destroyed in World War I. The Tsar of Russia, the Kaiser of Germany, and the Emperor of Austria-Hungary. Those were the last malchus in Europe, and the real malchus. I'm not talking about where somebody goes to an event and puts a funny outfit on, but who had mamish power and could control their country. It was gone. There's no malchus anymore. So these kind of things make major changes. So she describes that. She has a book on the American Revolution, the first salute. She has a book about the 1300s, 14th century, called The Distant Mirror, which is just absolutely fascinating. And she writes very well. It's well written and easy to read. Yeah. But so this was called the Black Swan event, where everything just v'nahapachu. Yeah, COVID was a Black Swan event, right? Destroyed everything. I had some guys at my Shabbos table this past Shabbos, and I was talking to them about their university and their degree. He says, "Well, of course, when COVID hit, everything fell apart." And their whole lives were destroyed by COVID. And the educators talk about what kids went through, how they lost, during COVID, and how much they missed out, and the whole world is playing catch up because of it. It was a terrible thing. It's called a Black Swan event. Anyway, the problem is a lot of it gets very technical. So the first couple of sections are tremendous. The last section, the addendum that he added on, is the only practical part of the whole book. But a lot of it, where he gets stuck on statistics and things, he can become repetitive and things like that. So it's definitely worth it for that part of it. The Holocaust by Martin Gilbert. For that matter, World War I by Martin Gilbert. He's an English historian. Very important. The Holocaust, it's not easy reading the book. And you can only read, in my opinion, some of it at a time, because it documents what happened in place after place after place. For World War II, I would also suggest The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, which gives a history. I don't think it gives so much of a Jewish history. Also on that topic, The War Against the Jews, which suggests that Hitler's main aim was not to conquer the world, but to destroy the Jews, and brings evidence to support this. The Real King Arthur. I don't even know if it's out there anymore. I had read it years ago. And it turns out that King Arthur was, in fact, a Roman Briton in the 6th century. And he presents all his evidence, how he uncovers who the real King Arthur was, which, again, I found absolutely fascinating, personally. All right. That's a quick overview. So these are all some things. Belina had to put together perhaps a more extensive reading list, and I'll put it up on the website for those who would like to check it out. And that's it. If you're not doing anything, so then you might as well do something that is constructive. And history is something that is very important to Jews, because as somebody pointed out, world history is Jewish history, because we're always there. One of my favorites I forgot to mention, The 15 Decisive Battles of World History, by Sir Edward Creasy, written in the 1850s, From Marathon to Waterloo. Also, just a very fundamental read. I read a book that was put out many years later, like in modern times, called The 100 Decisive Battles of World History. And he starts off by saying, I agree with Sir Edward Creasy. Those were the 15 most decisive battles. But they didn't include, they were only in Europe. They didn't include Asia. They didn't include Africa. They didn't include battles that I think are important just because of advances in warfare. They don't go past the Battle of Waterloo. There's been many other important battles since then, but he agrees that these 15 are decisive, and it gives you an insight. Oh, one of my favorite books. I used to read it a lot. I don't know what happened to it. It was called They Also Ran. If you like American history, or you at least want insight into American history. So there are people who know the presidents. But this is the biographies of everybody who lost the presidency. And most people have never even heard their name. Winfield Scott, or Winfield Scott Hancock, or James Blaine, or Fremont. Some people have heard of Fremont, perhaps. It gives you insight into what was going on in America when you see who lost the election. And their biography is William Jennings Bryan, Henry Clay. It's just the biographies are absolutely fascinating. They're vignettes. They're short. It's a short book, but a lot of fun. Okay, so definitely something that I think people should look into. Okay, and I don't know if I told this story the last time, but somebody told me, and I didn't check out the story because I'm not Pesach grown, but somebody told me that when Rav Gifter, Zatzal, the Rosh Yeshiva, tells, when he would get tired, He didn't have the head to learn. So he would relax by doing infinite mathematics. I said, what's infinite mathematics? And it says, how many points are there between 2 and 3? Infinite. How many points between 3 and 4? Infinite. So how many points are there between 2 and 4? 2 times infinity. Makes absolutely no sense. But you get the idea. Yeah, it's something that you can play around with. I used to tell people our sense of infinity is so finite that we can multiply infinities. You understand? But it is interesting. So like I say, if you're not doing anything anyway, this is as good a use of your time as whatever you're probably going to be doing on your phone. Okay, and this brings us to question and answers. We haven't done them in the past couple of weeks because I just talk so much these days. I don't know what it is. By Z. Horowitz, Rashi says the effects of a sin go on for 4 generations. Ad Shilashim v'ad Ribayim. If so, why are we punished for the chait of Adam Arishon or the Meraglim and the Egel? Very good question. So, it's very important to understand the difference between a punishment and a consequence. Meaning, if I do something foolish and I lose my arm, the fact that I don't have an arm is not a punishment, it's a consequence of a poor decision. Adam and Chava did something of cosmic magnitude that destroyed the world and brought a churban, brought death to the world, etc. That has to be fixed. When you break something, you have to fix it. We talked about this before, and it is appropriate with Elul coming. Tshuva does not mean repentance. Penance is where you suffer for your crimes. You go to jail to do penance. Hard time. Tshuva means lashuv, to come back together. You know, or as I say, if somebody locks himself in the room and won't come out, and then complains to God, why did he make him so lonely? You can't pin that on God. That was your personal decision, and that personal decision has consequences. Sometimes you see people make mistakes in relationships, and sometimes those relationships can be fixed, and sometimes they can't. Yeah, and it's nice to believe that everything can be forgiven and forgotten, but sometimes things have real consequences, and you have to live with the result of those consequences. So when Adam and Chava destroyed the world, we now live in a destroyed world. So it's not a question of why we're being punished. We're not being punished. We destroy the world. If you polluted the river, there's no place to drink. So don't blame that on God. Don't say to Kodesh Baruch Hu, why'd you do this? You did it. You did it yourself, and it's for you now to clean out the river. You have to undo the chait of Adam Arishon. But we don't. By the chait of the Meraglim, having coming now out of the 3 weeks. So the chait of the Meraglim, as we all know, as the Gemara says, they spoke Lashon Hara. Did we solve that problem? The pasuk says that they said because God hates us, that's why He's doing this to us. Which, of course, is the foundation of Sinas Chinim. Have we gotten over that? The Chazal say that any generation in which the Beis Hamikdash is not rebuilt, if it had existed in that generation, it would have been destroyed. So it's not that you're being punished for the sins of the Meraglim, you're being punished for your own sins. Because whatever the problem was that the Meraglim created, you didn't solve. You didn't make it better. Now, that's when it comes to those two events. The third one you brought in is the Egel. And by the Egel, this was actually a gift that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us. Because he said, if you suffer the consequences of this decision, it'll destroy you. So I'll make a payment plan. And I'll pay it out little bit by little bit over the generations so that you won't get hit with it all at once. And that's why the Egel continues to this day. Okay, by Anonymous. Everyone is horrified by Hamas's actions, that they've murdered whole families, women, babies, children, etc. But don't we have a mitzvah in the Torah to do the same to Amalek and the 7 nations of Canaan? No. We don't have the mitzvah to keep hacking at someone's head with a shovel to decapitate them. We do not have a mitzvah to take a baby and put him in the oven. Yeah? We don't have the mitzvah to rape people and do all these terrible things. We do have a mitzvah to wipe out Amalek. And I'm making a distinction here between Amalek and the 7 nations. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to us in the Torah, if you are bad, and you become bad, I'll give you 852 years, and then I will destroy you, but like wipe you out. Because you can't stay in Eretz Yisrael and be evil. And so Rashi says, V'noshantam, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu did a chesed for us, and put us into Golus after 850 years, because 2 more years we would have been beyond the point of return. But he got kicked out. Why? Because Hashem says, you cannot stay in Eretz Yisrael and be evil. If you do, you're going to get destroyed. That's just it. This is my palace, and that's the rules. And so when we came to the 7 nations, we said, listen, you guys have been very evil, but like super evil. Human sacrifice and all kinds of terrible things. And they worked to cancel out the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael. The Sfas Emes says, when we came into Eretz Yisrael, any place that had a wall around it from the time of Yeshua has a special level of Kedusha. Says the Sfas Emes, because the Knaanim would dafka identify where there was Kedusha and build a wall around it to fill it with as much tumah and immorality as they could to cancel out the Kedusha. So he said, listen, Hashem said, you guys can't stay in this land and be that evil. You want to go someplace else, but you can't stay here. So the Girgashi said, sounds good to me. Between me and you, I like this place, but I'm not interested in fighting people, who knocked off Sichon and Og. I'm not interested in fighting people who can split the sea and drop it on top of you. We're out. And it says the Girgashi went to Africa and they had a beautiful land and they lived happily ever after. And they got out. And the other one said, yeah, we'll fight you to the death. But that was their choice. The difference is Amalek. And this is the Hitler conundrum that people ask. If you could go into the past and see this little boy in Vienna, Adolf Schicklgruber, that was actually his name, and you could kill him knowing what he would do, would you do it? So the problem with this is we don't know. We live within time. And so I don't know how this person's going to develop. I don't know what's going to end up happening to them. And so I can't prosecute people based on what they might do. But if I know for sure, and I could go back in the past and stop him, wouldn't I do it? Amalek's hatred is so deep and powerful that it became part of their genetic makeup. To the point where they marched hundreds of miles. Amalek was in the south of Israel. They marched hundreds of miles out into the desert just to be able to attack us, knowing they would get destroyed just because they saw the entire world was overwhelmed from watching Kriyas Yamsuf, and they wanted to destroy that inspiration. That was it. And they knew they would get destroyed in the process, and they didn't care, because that's how much they hate God and hate the Jewish people. So, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, it's going to be you or them. I'm telling you right now. There's no, knocking the sword out of his hand and then letting him live. He's going to turn around and come back and kill you. And sure enough, Shaul, who kept Agag alive, from him came Haman, who tried to kill the entire Jewish people. It's in their genetic makeup. So, even when we do it, we have to be very careful. We're not doing this out of cruelty or achzarius. We're doing this because HaKadosh Baruch Hu said that guy is going to kill you. And if I don't take him down, he's going to take me down. That's just the Metzias. He's going to kill you and your family and everybody else, and you have to stop them. And we would rather not. We would rather not. We would rather try to win people over. And most of the time, we can. But when it comes to Amalek is suicidal in their desire to destroy the Jewish people. And so we have no choice. We won't call up our parents on the cell phone and say, we killed them. I killed them with my own hands. When there was that lynching in I don't know if it was in Ramallah or where it was, and they took these 3 soldiers and they killed them, they butchered them, and the Arabs held their hands up to the crowd with the blood of the Jews on it, and they were all cheering. No, we don't do that. We do what we have to do, but not because we want to. It's because you got to take out that person, because the person's going to kill you. And so, there are things that look similar, but it takes, intelligence and insight to be able to differentiate between the two and the approach. Okay, well that's it for this episode. If you want to find out more about the show, you can go to my website, RabbiOrlofsky.com. You can ask a question, you can leave a comment, you can sponsor an episode, sponsor question and answers, sponsor Parsha and 5. And that's it for this week. Until next time, I am David Orlofsky, and this has been the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.
It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. The Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Knowledge and wisdom will help you grow. Lots of fun in every episode, and we don't have to rhyme. No, we don't. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show on RabbiOrlofsky.com. Torah anytime, YouTube and more. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Till next time, till we meet again. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.